I guess.
Okay.
All right, and we are live for the first live with JK. I am excited to have Henna Pryor from Priority Group with us today. Welcome, Henna, to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be your first live in a while. I'll try to bring it.
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure you're going to be just fine. I'm excited to have you. So Henna Pryor from Priority Group, executive coach, sales trainer. We actually connected via a networking group that I was lucky to be a part of. And we had I met yourself, your husband, and we just actually developed a great relationship. And so I'm excited to have you today. And I'm excited for the audience to kind of get a little bit of knowledge about you, what you do. You've made some major pivots in your career. So we're going to talk all about that. Sales messaging. It's going to be a fun day today.
Yes, I'm excited. I feel like I could talk about this for hours. So we'll try to distill it for the audience as something bite-sized and actionable today.
Yeah, no, for sure. So why don't you go ahead and maybe talk a little bit about you, how you kind of got into sales first, and your story on how you pivoted out of and changed your career path into executive coaching.
Yeah. Okay. So I will start just by saying I'm just the textbook overachiever. I did everything in high school and college that, sort of the golden child should do. My parents are, immigrant parents. I'm first generation born in the US. And so, wonderfully, and sometimes to my chagrin, they were very hard on me about grades and performance and achievement. And so I, met those expectations full force. I was always really proud of, my grades. I went to a good college. I went to University of Delaware. I got my master's degree from UVA, and I landed at Ernst & Young, so a Big Four accounting firm, right out of college. And while I have a knack for numbers and was good at accounting, I think, to no surprise of anyone that actually knew me, my personality was a bit too big for accounting. And I was really craving the connection. Even though there was a client service element, I missed working with people. And so when I started to think about what are my next steps, where could I potentially achieve success, but more in line with my passions and my expectations, I started to explore different outlets, and that led me to staffing. So staffing is, the most pure form of sales, in my opinion, that you can possibly come across, because you're dealing with the human element. It's human capital. You're selling the service of people to people. And so to me, that was the greatest challenge, the greatest idea of, building relationships, being able to control my output was a big thing for me. In public accounting, I worked a lot of really long hours and got no overtime or very little, frankly, recognition for it. It was just an expectation. And so sales was very appealing because you put your everything into it, you see something on the other side of that, right? You see the result, you see the output. And so, I kind of decided to try it, to be honest, on a whim. And then 14 years later, I rode that wave to the top, quite frankly. And it was one of my best decisions.
That's amazing. So when you got into sales, was it something that was your family into sales? Did you have anybody in there? No.
No, decidedly no. And again, I don't like to play the immigrant card too much, because I think it can be a bit played out. But I think there are certain professions for folks that come to the, bring their families to America to raise them, where certain professions are sort of perceived as the elite, right? Like lawyers, doctors, engineers, things of that nature. I don't think sales, for a lot of folks, even maybe generationally, sales, not just immigrants, but in the US too, it was perceived as like a high flyer type of industry or career to pursue. And so I had to really have my parents trust me on this one. I said, I think I can really make something of this. I think I can be really successful. I think I could potentially out earn some of those lawyers and doctors and engineers. Just trust me. And so they did. And no, there was no background. They were pretty, boots on the ground, working corporate type jobs. My mom actually worked for a catering company. My dad was at an accounting role for most of his career. So I was the first. And so there was some convincing needed, for sure.
So you got into sales, had a successful career in recruitment.
Yep.
That's where we met our mutual friend, Casey Jaycox.
Yep.
You met Casey there. I met him in the networking group, but and then you made a major change, career change. Why'd you do it?
Why? I think my coworkers are still sort of reeling from the fact that I did it because, at 14 years, I had built something humbly. It was phenomenal, something I never thought I'd achieve in my 20s and 30s, to be honest. And, had a great flexible schedule, had great earnings from it. But I was hungry to play a bigger game. There comes a point in one's career where I knew what I was capable of. I knew what kind of sales income I was able to make. And I was hungry to just bring more of what I thought moved the needle to the masses. I was hungry to learn. I was hungry to help other people lean into their edge and lean into things that were uncomfortable in order to help them grow. And I knew I couldn't do that within the confines of a publicly traded corporation. And so
Mhm.
I went and got executive coach certified and frankly never looked back. That was a little over a year ago. And it's just been eye on the prize since then.
That's amazing. And you're still kind of focused on recruitment,
Um,
staffing. Is that your
yeah.
world? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much, dip in the toe of the actual day to day of that, but I'll tell you, it was an accident. I meant to fully pivot to executive and leadership coaching, and my involvement in staffing is more heavily on the coaching and training side for staffing. Never the intention. It was never the
Yeah.
intention, but as you and I had talked about at one point, I saw this skills gap in training for staffing. I saw there was a real disadvantage to people in the industry. They weren't being taught this element of the business that we're going to talk about. And I searched the globe. I said, who is teaching this? And really, who's teaching this to sales folks in general? You know, not enough people. There's a huge lag in this training for really all kinds of sales. And once I realized I had a knack for it and an ability to teach it, it was hard to unsee that. I couldn't walk away from it, seeing it as such a gaping hole in training. And so I ended up kind of going that way with it too.
It's funny. It's like you found a gap.
Yeah.
You found a solution. You went out, created a business. I mean, it's so sales. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great prospecting story for yourself.
Yeah, no, and truly, and what I teach in a lot of my trainings, this is how I've built my business in the last year. I practice what I preach. It's not like I have some quiet, investor that's pushing everything forward. I'm one conversation at a time, one message at a time. I'm doing it right along with everyone. So, practicing what I preach every single day.
No, it's amazing. I'm happy for you, and we're going to talk a little bit today about sales messaging. And I don't know if there could be a better time. I mean, you started the business before COVID, but I mean, messaging was changing long before COVID. How people did business, how you communicated with customers, how you reached out, how you found new customer acquisition, right down to how to do business with your existing customers. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, in your opinion, what gap did you find in sales messaging that was so powerful and has turned into a business for you?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. This isn't new. This didn't start in COVID. I would argue that for the better part of a decade, this has been sort of a shift in the way business is done. So first, let me just share a few facts. 90% of people no longer pick up an unknown phone number. 90%, right? Like this thing rings and we're like, who's that? Put it down, right? We don't pick it up. And so the way prospecting is done has fundamentally changed. Back in 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and even 10 years ago, I would argue, we did not have as many things competing for our attention. In this moment in time, we've got our phones dinging, we've got our social media open over here, right? Some of us, especially now, have like kids at home doing virtual school. There is so much attention. 20, 30 years ago, when someone is at work, they're sitting at their desk, they've got their workload and maybe their phone rings. But other than that, you've kind of got someone. And so attention is more of a currency now in sales than it's ever been. You need to be able to get someone's attention. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that a cold call on the phone is not the preferred way of doing that anymore. So what used to happen is that people would send or leave a voicemail for someone. They would say, hey, so-and-so from such and such firm, love to set up a time to chat. That voicemail would sit there, and then they would follow up with an email that said, hey, just left you a voicemail. That was the email, right? It was just like a reinforcement of the voicemail. And so to me, I'm thinking, what a missed opportunity, right? That people tend to read the email first. before they check the voicemail. So why, as training as an industry, or why in any sort of sales, staffing, recruiting, why are we not teaching people how to write wildly effective messages, knowing that this is the first thing that's being read? And so the training on it's just been behind. It's not that the sales messaging is new. It's just that there is a set of blueprints and patterns and, psychological tools that go into what makes an effective message and what makes somebody compelled to respond. And there's just been a big lag on teaching it to folks who need it the most.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point because, a lot of, not just change, because there's a lot of books out there about pick up the damn phone, dial, call, call. And they almost revert to email or text messaging or anything digitally as the secondary touch point.
Right. Or the last resort. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So, why has it changed so much? I mean, is it demographics? Is it just people are too accessible now via phone, or their information's too wildly, available for people to pick up the phone and call, and they're trying to avoid that as much as they can? Like, why is it changed?
Yeah, I think, it does kind of come back to that, the fact that we have so many competing priorities for our attention right now. We have literally stimulus coming from every direction. So most of us, out of necessity, have been forced to become more boundaried with our time. And so one of the ways we can do that with our phone is by saying, this person's not programmed, therefore it's not a priority, so I'm not going to pick it up. So our phones have enabled us to screen in that way. Emails, outside of spam, which goes into your spam folder, but emails still come into your inbox in the order in which they were received. So a lot of folks, I think, have started to understand that this is a shift that's happening. People are increasingly less inclined to pick up their phone. And even if they leave a voicemail, it's a week before anybody checks the voicemail, right, of the unknown number. I get a week later, I'm like, oh, the pharmacist called, right? People don't check it anymore. And so just human behavior has changed. We start to be more mindful with what we're willing to devote our time to. And messaging is something that is a little bit more, one-to-one when it's done correctly. And it allows somebody to be able to sort of filter who they absorb from. And that's something that's, again, important to understand, but also important to get right if you want the visibility into the people you want to talk to.
So has email become, in your opinion, email is your first touch point?
Email is my simultaneous touch point. So I think that, I think that there's still a value to a voice, and there's something about, actually having that voice with it. So I think both things should be done simultaneously or, within seconds of each other, but both should earn similar attention, if not more on the email side.
What's the biggest common mistake people are doing in their outreach with emails?
Biggest mistake is that it's just a throwaway email. So let's start with subject lines. Left you a voicemail, just checking in, new product, new opportunity, like these throwaway, dull subject lines. I'll say it again. Attention is a currency. You need to stand out. You need to be compelling enough that somebody says, huh, what's this? Or, huh, who's this? Right? And then let's just say you're lucky enough that your subject line gets through the noise and that you actually get the email opened. Then the email is just, hi, I'm so-and-so from such and such firm. I have this many years of experience and we have a great solution for you. No one asked. No one asked you yet. There's a fundamental misstep that most salespeople do about how this outreach goes. It should never start with you telling them all about you. There's some misguided understanding about, I need to throw all my credibility in at the beginning. I need to make sure that my email is full of all these big words so I sound professional. It needs to be really long and include everything. No. I could give you thousands of examples of this, but there's something very fundamental that needs to shift in the way a lot of sales folks are taught how to write a compelling message that warrants a response.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest mistake that most people do is they just continuously push out emails or text messages or whatever it may be. It's easier for them because they hide. Yeah. And so if you're going to do that, then the messaging has to be powerful. And it typically is that stereotypical, whether they're blabbing on the phone and they spew out everything about them, no solutions, no nothing, just this is what we do. Do you want it?
Right.
They do the same thing in email.
Yes or no. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Actually, we got some, Larry Levine just jumped in here and he's throwing some information out there, with respect to the tools of change. And he's right. Joshua Wittenbach actually just threw a question on here, and I think it's a good one. Is there a generational shift where younger employees are not as comfortable talking on phones due to basically growing up with that phone in their hand on social media or texting?
Yeah. Oh, heck yeah.
Is that a part of it? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I think we're naive to not acknowledge that this is the generation who is dating on Tinder. And, they're not even going up and putting themselves out there to ask for the phone number. They're just swiping. So definitely there's a generational component to this. I think this still applies to really, even the former generations. I think there's still a product, knowledge that needs to happen about what they're dealing with, or a knowledge of what their days are looking like. Now, granted, part of what I teach in my program is you have to know your audience, right? This is going to be a little bit nuanced depending on the generation. So that's a great call by Josh. There's going to be a generation where they're probably never going to call you back. They might do the entire transaction in the written word, believe it or not. And then there's going to be a generation that says, I don't want this many emails. Let's get on a call. So part of that is going to be the art and the science of figuring that out. But I still think no matter who the audience is, you need to recognize that messaging is now an integral part of the process. You can't ignore it anymore. So
we talked a little bit when we had a little chat a couple of weeks ago about nudging. Nudging the relationship along. And, I know I do it when I reach out on email, and I've taken your course, by the way, or you're actually, it's just your email series, which is tremendous. And I recommend everybody jump on her website, priortygroup.com. And we will post all this in the notes and everything, but, and check out Henna's courses. But I know I get that anxiety of, okay, I've sent an email. I've got no response. Yeah. I'm going to shoot another email. I've gotten no response. Yep. How much is too much? How much is not enough? And talk a little bit about that nudging process that you and I discussed earlier. Yeah. So it's not the number of nudges. It's not the frequency of the nudge. It's the quality of the nudge. The reason the nudging is annoying and doesn't work is because our nudging typically looks like just following up, just checking in, that's what our nudging looks like. Let me tell you what that translates to the reader. You haven't gotten back to me yet. Hurry up. I'm waiting for you. That's what they're feeling on the other side. And so I would argue that it has less to do with the number of nudges. I don't know many people that have said, man, I nudged that person 7 times and they got back to me and said, yes, I'd love to work with you. Usually it's, they got so annoyed that they finally got back to me saying, bug off. That's usually how it happens. So it's the quality of the nudge. So instead of just checking in, I would love to see the subject line be progress on the blank, progress on the discussion with your coworker, progress on our meeting talking points, like something that actually implies that there's something of value in the rest of the message. And then you continue on with something, again, more meaningful. How is the discussion about such and such coming along? Not just checking in, just following up. Did you see my message? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Either way, you sound like a pestering, like it's the equivalent of, my kid pulling on my shirt, right? Are you paying attention to me? So how can we make these more productive? Psychologically, there are ways, there's language that makes people more inclined to say, let me get back to this person. And we need to start focusing on that instead. Yeah, I was actually going to bring up that point. It wasn't in our quote unquote questions that we we're going to talk about, but you make a valid point. Language is huge. How much does vocabulary, language, words, how much does that play into grabbing a person's attention? A lot of people rate full-blown novels when I've seen emails where it's 6 or 7 paragraphs and you get 3 or 4 lines in and it's like, woof, I'm
out.
I'm out. Right. So how important is that?
So I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is language plays an extremely important part, extremely important. The good news is it's not the kind of language you think. The language that moves the needle is when you talk like a human, when you write like you talk. You don't need to use fancy jargon. You don't need to write in perfect sentence structure. You don't have to have these detailed, cohesive New York Times bestseller emails, but you do need to write like you talk. And so I'm going to argue that language matters immensely but it probably will be a heck of a lot easier if you're doing it right. If you're doing it in a way that's actually resonating with people, it feels more natural to you. It's easier for you to write. And so part of where I get so locked up is these emails that get deleted. Part of it is because they're so stiff. They're so stiff. They're so corporate and salesy. It's like white noise. And so, a lot of what I teach is how do you get out of that? These antiquated rules of this is how I need to sound. You don't need to sound like that. In fact, your prospects are not interested in you sounding like that. They're not interested in working with you if you sound like that. And so it's good news for most people when they realize that they're allowed to take a deep breath and be themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give a shout out to our mutual friend, Paul Hari there. When you write a love letter to somebody, you don't start with, I am great. Don't you want to? And he's right. It's absolutely right. David Kaplan throughout, researching the customer. So how important is that? I mean, a lot of people avoid that. They have a template that seemed to have worked for one customer.
Right.
And they eliminate a name, they put the new name on there, and they click send.
Yeah. No. Templates and scripts should all be thrown out the window. You should have a set of blueprints and strategies and understanding of sales messaging patterns to live by. But templates and scripts, I don't care who you're talking to the person receiving them, sound like templates and scripts. You think they don't, but they do. And the reason is templates and scripts were written by one person and it reflects their voice. Every other email that comes from you doesn't sound like that. And they will know that. And so to David Kaplan's point, spot on. In fact, David, the entire first workshop in my training program talks about understanding your prospect. Getting your prospect is, I would argue, 75% of the battle, because then you know exactly which words are going to resonate with them, exactly what they're thinking, exactly what they're feeling when they're reading your email. And if you can come into that conversation from that place, you're in every time. But again, 80+% of sales folks don't start like that. They start with, let me tell you about me. You'll tell them about you later, but you need to understand what your prospect is thinking, feeling, up against, researching the customer. David's dead on. I mean, that's half the battle right there.
Yeah. My buddy, Matt Barra, people buy from people. Absolutely. We've talked about that before. I think in many shows, you and I have talked about that, people, you have to have that connection. You have to be able to develop that commonality, that connection, that feeling that there's a human at the other end of this piece of paper or email or text or whatever it may be. And if you're just going to send out the scripts, that's why I'm on that bubble on sales campaigns, because it's kind of, again, it's the same kind of thing. You could put the name in there and it automatically generates 10,000 emails and it goes out to 10,000 different people. And you might capture some, but it's all on bulk buy.
Yeah. You'll
buy
capture some,
and hope something comes in.
You'll turn off a whole bunch more. That's the problem. And so I'll add something to Matt's people buy from people. People also buy on emotion first and they justify with logic second. This is not like some people. This is all people. This is how neurology works, or neuroscience. The stimulus goes through the brain, goes through the emotional brain first, then goes to the logical brain. People always buy on emotion first. And people in sales that don't get this, they try to sell both verbally, but especially in their writing, on logic first or on information first. And then they're going, oh, no one is responding. The market's dead. Market's not dead. Your message is dead. That's the issue.
Yeah. So with your email program specifically, give us, give the audience three secrets or tips that they can do today to improve their messaging out there.
Sure. So I'll just give you a couple that come off the top of my head. So one of them I shared, but I'll get a bit deeper into, which is write like you talk. Relax your language in a way that feels human. People buy from people, but they also buy from people who they know, like, and trust. You don't want your prospects to be on edge. Okay. They're already on edge, especially now, especially in 2020, they're already on edge. One of the ways you can instantly put their defenses down is being a human in your email. Don't start selling. Don't start, talking about yourself in detail, just connect with the person, start there. And again, I have a super big process on how to do this, but that's number one. Number two, I would say, is focus on benefits in addition to features. So the features and benefits discussion is a big part of my program, but features of something, no matter what sales you're in, the features are what the thing is. So the features of what you're selling is what it is, whether it's widgets, whether it's, professionals with a certain skill set and staffing.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it is. The benefits are what it does for someone. This is why you should care, right? And so a lot of us in sales will sit there and spew about the features. So in my world, in staffing, I could be talking to a candidate and say, well, this job has a 40-hour work week and on-site childcare and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I could list all the features. Great. So what? What does it mean to the person on the other side? And some of those benefits would be, on-site childcare. So you don't have to leave work stressed out and race into daycare the last 5 minutes before the buzzer every single day like you have been. Or, 40-hour work week so that you can actually start cooking again at night instead of getting takeout. You mentioned you're so tired of ordering. What does it mean to the person? And so one of the fundamental lessons is stop coming at everything with features alone and start bringing in the benefits. Humans are going to do this gear turning no matter what. They're going to start to think in their minds, okay, this is the feature. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? They're going to have that playing all the time. Make it easier for them and tell them a little bit about what's in it for them. That's another one. And if I were to say a third, is that subject lines need to be prime part of your process. Too many people in sales treat it as an afterthought. And literally your subject line is what someone uses to decide, is this person worth my attention and time? Yes or no? And too many people write this great big long email and then it's just checking in. New opportunity. That's the subject line. And I'm like, such a waste of effort. Such a waste of effort,
Well, especially if you're reaching out to C-level and C-suite level types of individuals, they are getting, in some cases, hundreds of emails.
Hammered. Mm-hmm.
And they're also, in a lot of cases, getting their emails pre-screened by whether it be executive assistants or the gatekeepers. And so if it's not powerful enough to get through there, they're going to skim and see it, and it just goes into the garbage. So it needs to be powerful. It's a great point. It's a great point.
Yeah.
I love the program. I think there's super interest with my audience specifically, because I think in our generation, email is becoming more powerful. It needs to be part of your arsenal, that you have really sharpened the tools on your skill set for that. So I'm going to encourage everybody to check out Henna. Pryor, where can they find you?
Honestly, the website for the program is under construction. I'm having it sort of redone, but the easiest way is just link up with me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn. So just find me there, shoot me a message. I can tell you more. But I honestly, I say this to everyone, and I'm saying it, no BS, total honesty, whether it's me or someone else, it doesn't matter. I just want this to become a priority. Part of the reason sales of any variety has started to become challenging or started to get a bad rap is that there is this deluge of these sloppy, meaningless, automated, number of things I could say, messages. And so if I can get one takeaway from your folks that are watching this, it's whether it's me or someone else, please make this a priority on your team. No more sending out, just checking in. I'm so-and-so from this firm. Here's what I have, no more. Make this something that you really focus on if you want to actually create results in your business, because this is where it's going in 2020 and beyond, whether you want to admit it or not. This is how it's going to be. Yeah,
absolutely. And you hit a key point there. Automation. Stay away from the automation. Drives me nuts.
I mean, only if you're amazing at using it perfectly, I give you permission, but I would say that's 1% of people that have actually, it's a very low percentage of people that use it well.
Check out Henna. She will pre-screen if you're perfect at it, and give you a thumbs up if you can go automation.
Yes,
so
for sure.
I always, exactly. I always ask my guests this question. It's an interesting time. And as everybody goes through this COVID, a lot of people are making changes in their life, personally, professionally. And I just think that there's a lot of there's a lot of people doing a lot of thoughts and thinking about their personal and professional situations, specifically on their professional careers. And so, if you're standing in front of your 20-year-old self, knowing everything you know now, COVID, the whole thing, you've made your change, you now have a successful career outside of the corporate America, if you will. What advice do you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I love that question. And the advice I would give my 21 or 20-year-old self is be experimental. I think anyone like me who's wired as a high achiever, we've got our eye on the prize and we see this ladder and we want to climb it. But not everything has to be all in. I think there's a lot of emphasis in sales about, give it your everything, give it your all. Sometimes be okay making small bets, right? Let me try doing it this way today and see if it gets a result. Let me try learning a little bit about this, see if it moves the needle. And if it works, if something happens, double down on your small bet. But I would have given myself a lot more permission to be more playful and experimental in things in my career that were interesting to me and that might have moved the needle, instead of staying on the path that was so prescribed or that I thought was the one that would give me success.
I love that. I really do. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was excited.
People ask great questions, so thank you for having me.
This is the first live. I wasn't sure if we had anybody, but I want to thank everybody that did join in. Larry, Matt, Dave, Paul, Josh. Thank you for tapping in and watching this powerful messaging. Get it done, everyone. Learn how to do it. Check out Henna at in Oliver on her LinkedIn and on her website, and we will have all that in the show notes. But thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you.